Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChainArgos. With a blockchain intelligence firm. Won't tell you what we're famous for, you can figure it out. With me every week, as usual, my CEO and Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Reiter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your comments and feedback. Thanks for tuning in to us via Spotify. Increasingly, you may want to actually consider watching us on YouTube simply because you'll get a chance to look at the screens and stuff like that. We'll try our best to describe it, but you might miss out some of the stuff. It's just usually the last part of the show anyway. So this week, what we're going to talk about is John's going to tell me about Ethena Stablecoins. I know very little about this stuff, so he'll educate all of us. We'll talk about liquid staking, not to be confused with liquid smoke, which is not great. I mean, I personally don't really like liquid smoke. I mean, if you can have the real stuff, why not? In terms of your barbecue and that kind of thing. Finally, we'll look at how we do forwarding contracts and dispel some of the myths that come with this whole, the so-called magic. Like, how do you know these addresses belong to Binance or any kind of exchange for that matter? What's behind it? Is there really magic? No, there isn't. Spoiler alert, there's no magic. And we'll show you how easy it is to get these things done towards the end of the show. But without further ado, tell me a little bit about what this Ethena stablecoin stuff is.
So there's a new stablecoin out of Ethena Labs with an E, so Ethena, I guess it's an Ethereum Ethena joke, fair enough. So this is based on the idea of having offsetting long and short positions to produce a stable price of $1 for some backing asset. This is not an attempt to produce an under 100% collateralized stablecoin. So I don't know if people have given up on that or not, but that is not the goal here. The goal is not to use $30 to support $100 of stablecoin. It's to use $100 to support $100 of stablecoin, but without having to hold $100. So fair enough. That is a thing. And there's, in principle, nothing wrong with that idea. You can make that work. If you give me $100 of value at start, the simplest thing to do is to just keep $100, right? If you give me $100 worth of, in this case, it starts with Ethereum, but it could be bananas. It doesn't matter. If I sell them for $100 and keep the $100, I got $100. That's fine. Their goal here seems to be to do that without the $100 in a bank account. We'll talk about some details around that in a second. And then they also intend to produce a bunch of yield from the strategies that are used to hold those things. So idea has been kicked around for a few years of using some sort of offsetting futures positions, derivative positions of some sort, to not have to hold dollars. There's nothing really wrong with that. The issue is that you're going to then end up with instead of having a dollar centralized counterparty bank holding dollars, you have a centralized futures trading whatever type thing. Because it isn't possible to build leveraged trading decentralized protocols that are riskless, right? They can always default if the price, whatever, goes high enough and the collateral's not there. You end up in a situation where you've got risk in your system, right? So that's fine-ish. You could use a trading protocol that was 100% collateralized in both directions that wouldn't have any risk. It'd be super capital inefficient, right? So that's not a great way to do things. Nobody seems to want to do that. Fine. Okay, so what they've accepted here, and they're quite clear about this, is that there is some centralized party risk, there's some protocol risk, there's all kinds of risk. They may all be low probability risks, but they are very non-zero risks. Fine. So they're building a stablecoin that is a possible whatever stablecoin, and then they're doing a whole bunch of stuff around staking ETH, restaking ETH, and all this kind of action to generate yield, which they're paying out on the coins. I believe the initial claim was something on the order of 20-25%, and then it has just launched, and apparently they realized 40% something, and the team has decided to pay out 15%. Whether or not the team deciding on a given level of dividend payment, it's dividend payment, right, give or take, you may have some legal problems somewhere else, but whatever, that's not a finance question. That's the way the thing works. There's a quite complicated collection of steps that they go through to generate yield and not exactly decentralize, but sort of embed into the system this way of running a stablecoin. Okay, maybe. So you can stake the ETH and you get the staked ETH back, and then you have to have a perp position in either ETH or in staked ETH to offset that position. So you can have constructing a long and short that net out to $1 worth. Okay. It's all very complicated to just have $1, but then to generate some yield on it. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a risky trading strategy that does this and claiming you might pay some yield to some people. It does seem to have a lot of attack vectors. Right? It depends heavily on the whole restaking whatever stuff, staked ETH stuff all working properly. If the underlying stuff gets slashed, for example, we'll come back to this later,
we'll come back to
value will disappear. And there are lots of ways in which the funding could diverge significantly from what you expect, and there isn't enough money, and then stuff has to get force unwound and the rest of it. They have a insurance fund. It's a finite size insurance fund. We've all seen that movie before. So it just seems to have an awful lot of the risks of... it has many of the same risks as Luna. The one risk it does not have is not starting with enough money, but because it's not keeping the money in dollars and some flavor of the same risk. So it's interesting to see. I don't know.
So when you told me about this, I had some questions, obviously. And one of the most obvious questions, first and foremost, is that if you have a group of people, whatever the case may be, who are then sort of like deciding how much we're going to pay out, kind of looks like a security to me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm interested from the finance perspective, but I agree that it certainly seems like a collective investment scheme of some sort, yes, which maybe will be a problem or not. It's, I believe, a permissionless protocol, so the people who developed it are running it, so they're now running a centralized permissionless protocol. So they may. Well, I mean,
they must be, because otherwise, how would you decide?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it went to a vote or something. It's not.
Even if there was a vote, I don't think it would really matter if one guy controls the switch. But yes, agreed.
So
I wasn't particularly interested in the securities law problems, although I agree that there are almost certainly securities law problems.
Beyond the securities law problems, one of the other questions I had was, there are elements to this that feel a bit like Terra Luna. First of all, you have the so-called insurance fund, which is supposed to, and we're going to get into that when we talk about liquid staking. So there's the insurance fund that's supposed to sort of like, because if you want to do liquid staking, the whole point of this is that, and this is for people who are not familiar with how this works. TLDR, in a proof of stake system like Ethereum, if you wanted to stake Ethereum to secure the network, you have to leave it there for a period of time. Then that money that ETH is basically at risk. As John mentioned, like from slashing, network outages and stuff like that. You may not get 100 ETH back in the dollar, so to speak. So because people didn't want to have their ETH like stuck inside that kind of staking, they created this thing called liquid staking, where instead of you have you give it to these people who would do some staking they do on ETH, but they wouldn't. Let's say you gave them 100 ETH, so it's easy to look at round numbers. They wouldn't necessarily take 100 ETH and lock it up into and stake that on Ethereum, because then you wouldn't have any liquidity. Like, let's say you wanted to yank it tomorrow and stuff like that. There's just no way to do that.
Well, you're trading receipts, right? Yeah. So in the abstract, Ethena Stablecoin is built on things on top of Ethereum staking. So you stake tokens. Those tokens are then at risk. If you make a mistake, we can talk about what a mistake means. But if the system that you operate when it's given its turn to produce a block makes an error, it loses some of its money. That's the way that you punish people for making mistakes and incentivize them to not make mistakes. What you could do is you could all deposit into the protocol, and then you get receipts, and we can just trade those receipts among each other. The amounts don't really matter. Those receipts are presumably worth something. So because the staking process generates a yield, you could imagine that those receipts generated a price that sort of accretes over time as the right to withdraw staking rewards increases. In fact, many of the protocols in practice that exist are what's known as rebasing. So instead of the price accreting, instead of 100 receipts, I get 100.1 receipts, 100.2 receipts, whatever. There's different ways you can work that. It's effectively the same. The value of the holdings goes up. It is Ethena, roughly speaking, requires that price always remain pretty close to 1-for-1 with the ETH inside the protocol.
Yeah.
I think you can see where some problems may begin to develop here. There are a lot of ways of trading those receipts versus the underlying tokens, and if those prices diverge, you're going to start to have margin calls and money that needs to get paid from place to place and funding and all kinds of different weirdness. The insurance fund exists to backstop that. So the problem with Luna was that if people tried to withdraw too much money, if the equilibrium switched to withdraw instead of deposit, the Luna Foundation Guard only had a fixed amount of money to bridge that gap, and then it ran out of money and the system collapsed. Here, if there was distress in any one of a number of possible attack vectors against this system, they have a finite amount of money to patch over that hole. Here, it's not necessarily withdrawing from the stablecoin. It's probably massive withdrawing pressure on the underlying staking mechanism, or the funding on various perpetual futures related to the staking mechanism. And then the insurance fund or something else would have to come in and try to buy that out, bridge that gap. You would imagine, for example, losses and price dislocations to occur if there was a large slashing. Right? That's the direction that's headed in. Right? So.
Okay, and that segues into this concept of liquid staking and economic incentives, and how, as we saw with the 2008 financial crisis, where you remove the risk. When you remove the risk, the economic risk from a certain type of activity or behavior, that's when you incentivize the reckless taking of risk.
We're always paying attention. If you're not going to wear the losses, you don't have to pay attention to prevent the losses from happening. Yes.
Correct. So how does that relate to liquid staking?
Okay, so the concept behind staking is that instead of paying people in fresh tokens to just generate hardware or whatever on the network, the proof of work style, here you have a system where everybody contributes a bunch of money, and then you all take turns validating transactions. And if you make a mistake is decided by the rest of the group voting against you. They take some portion of your money. It's not exactly just naked voting, but whatever. There's some procedure there. The problem, of course, is, let's say I'm a malicious node operator and I have some money at stake, and as soon as my block finishes in which I did a bunch of wrong stuff, I just withdraw all my money and leave. You have no way of seizing it. So you need some kind of lockups and time periods and withdrawal queues and all that kind of stuff. ETH has a bunch of that stuff, and that stuff is whatever. It might work. It's fine. I mean, that's an engineering problem. Clearly, the length of the withdrawal queue doesn't have a right answer. It just has a bunch of different possible answers. What people built on top of it is effectively wrapped versions of those staking deposits and then started to trade them. And it's kind of weird that those trade at 100 cents on the dollar because, while there's some yield associated with it, there's also some risk associated with it. Maybe those things match exactly, right? But, you'd expect maybe one would trade a little bit below the other. Were there to be a large slashing, so again, let's say Lido is one of the larger operators. Coinbase runs some staking services. A bunch of large companies do this. Let's say one of them decided it wanted to do some malicious stuff, right? they could do the malicious stuff, presuming that they would soon get slashed, and then you would know that the price of the token staked into that protocol would drop, right? It's a relatively straightforward attack for the operator of the staking pool to run, or for anybody that runs a staking pool. Similarly, if you saw upcoming slashing, you would expect selling that stuff down. So there is a withdrawal queue from ETH staking, again, as we discussed, because the money has to sit there for some period of time. That's what's known as the nothing at stake problem. You can just not have anything at risk. Because of that, if there was massive demand for ETH as opposed to receipts for the staked ETH, those prices will move out of line. We've seen this a couple of times regarding various crises in crypto, because effectively the 100 ETH is supposed to be locked up. You're not supposed to be able to go trade them somewhere else, and that liquidity bridges back. It is a weird case where it's pretty obvious that this staked ETH trading for the same price as ETH is not a long-term stable equilibrium. The right answer's got to be lower somewhere, and or at least when a slash is incoming, there will be a gapping down. So let's say 30% of your ETH is going to get slashed. So in some sense, the right price is 70 cents. Probably going to go to 60, and there'll be people buying at 60, 61, and trying to withdraw the 70, entering the withdrawal queue. But you will see a large dislocation that will break all of these economic equilibrium-based protocols that sit atop this type of thing all at once.
And, okay, so there's that, but at the same time, is there a danger to the underlying protocol, to Ethereum?
Okay. So this is what I'm getting at, I suppose, earlier. So if most of the ETH that's securing the network, is in liquid staking protocols where nobody feels like their money is tied up for a meaningful period of time, then nobody really has an incentive to run this stuff correctly. You're just relying on the operator of the service to care about perpetuating the network. That's fine, but you could achieve the same result by just rotating validation of the network among a dozen people that all profess to love the network. okay. Yeah, they're definitely, and I know there's been some discussion about to what extent this sort of reduces the security of the system. Yeah, if the money's not at risk, the money's not at risk, and so it doesn't secure the system. I will note, staked ETH is just another form of wrapped token.
Yeah, and in a permissionless system, there is no limit to how much you can do. We've seen this problem before. Remember, I mean...
well, the looped leverage from 2-3 years ago was all this. Yeah.
And we've seen this problem before because that's how we discovered that Binance's BUSD was unbacked by 1.4 billion, under-collateralized by 1.4, because that was wrapped on BSC.
Well, okay, I mean, that's another variant of sort of permissionless wrapping.
Yeah, permissionless wrapping, but conceptually, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, no, the problems that Paxos had there were precisely this, in that Paxos' argument was, it's permissionless, we can't control what Binance does, which, I mean, to some extent is mechanically true. Yeah, so because there's no way to stop wrapping in a generic, whatever, smart contracting environment, you're always going to have possible for people to come up with things that evade the economic security part of it. You can avoid this if you don't have smart contracts, or if you only have very simple smart contracts. But if you have rich smart contracts, you cannot prevent this from happening. So it seems like over time, because people want liquidity, the system is going to slowly migrate further and further away from the money actually being at risk. And if nobody has an interest in securing the network that exceeds their interest in some other bet out there, things will collapse. This is the example from The Big Short with the you have a $10 million underlying investment and then $1 billion side bet, right? To the extent to which somebody has $50 million staked ETH sitting in there, but is able to make a $1 billion leverage bet on staked ETH versus ETH. Right, they no longer they would now like their ETH to be slashed.
Yeah.
Right, this is precisely the Big Short structure, the thing explained by Selena Gomez and Richard Thaler, I think, at the poker table. It's funny that there's even a discussion about whether or not that's true. Right.
Yeah. That.
If you believe Lido and Coinbase and whoever the big stakers are love the network, that's fine. That's nothing to do with how this is sort of an inbuilt feature of the system. You're just saying you trust those parties to behave in a way that you like. Okay.
You might be right, or not.
You're certainly not doing permissionless or trustless finance.
Well, I think that's not even a point up for a discussion. I mean, you definitely trusting somebody in this case.
Well, no, because a lot of people talk. One of the big questions around Ethena is about how sustainable this yield is if it gets large enough. At the same time, you've seen an awful lot of the staking, the liquid staking protocols get to be very, very big. When you get to a point where the liquid staking stuff is the majority of the stuff that's at risk, well, yeah, that's the scaling limit, right? If 10% of the ETH that's staked is in a liquid whatever protocol, it probably doesn't make too much difference because the vast majority of the network's money's at risk anyway. But you can't ever get large enough that none of the money's at risk. Right? You limit the ability to have the $10 million of risk with $1 billion side bet, if you can keep the amount small.
So, and given that this is a potential attack surface, so to speak, for Ethereum, do you think any of the recent outages could potentially have anything to do with that?
It seems reasonable to think that there was an ETH outage. Was it 6-8 months ago, something like that? It seems reasonable to think that the complexity in the staking protocol and the ways that it would be exploited might explain some of the problems that have come up, and that continuing, if not necessarily bugs, but just sort of oddness in the protocol. It's a complex protocol, right? So, okay. And it's a complex protocol operating on a completely asynchronous system. There are likely to be race conditions in various places that you can cause trouble like this. Inconsistent stake, deposit, and withdrawal requests, different parts of the network in adjacent time periods, might confuse things, maybe. And something like that, I mean, it's software, it has bugs. Something like that will eventually cause a large slashing incident for sure, which will dislocate these prices. I mean, that's assured because the probability of it's above zero, so it will eventually happen.
So on that note, let's take a look at forwarding contracts. John will take us through that.
Okay, so let me switch to the. Alrighty, so I'll put this over. Oh, okay, there we go. Very good. So we're just using Binance because it's the largest exchange, and people have all heard of this. So what we're going to look at here is the way that we identify deposit contracts which is a form of forwarding contract. So this is, strictly speaking, I guess we're doing some kind of clustering or very limited AI, expert system-y type work, but there's some very simple rules being applied here to identify these things. So we have a bunch of addresses that are called Binance, right? So what we're looking for here is stuff that's sent to Binance. You can find the 20 major Binance exchange addresses in all sorts of places. The Binance website, Etherscan, at this stage, proof of reserves, all kinds of places. Fine. So how do you identify a forwarding contract and a deposit contract? Well, what you're looking for here, and the way we programmatically generate these tags, is we find wallets that receive from a large number of places and only send to stuff that's Binance. Maybe sometimes you're not entirely sure because only 5 transactions. So we've pulled here is on Tron a large number of these things, and you can see these all say forward track tokens to Binance, sometimes with extra little bits of information. And you look at the number of transfers here. So if you've got 9,867 transfers, right, some huge amount of transfers, and they all follow that pattern, this is a Binance deposit address, right? That's something that you can programmatically determine. And you see here, this is over periods of years, right? 2022, 2024. This has been four years of activity there. This one's been going for 4 years, whatever, long periods of time. So this is a pretty straightforward thing you can do to programmatically identify this. We have millions and millions of these. Everybody has millions of these. And these are things that you can do programmatically with really high certainty. Is it possible that somebody set up an address that dumps a bunch of tokens into Binance that Binance knows nothing about? That's not... Sure, I suppose, maybe. But, they almost certainly didn't do that 7,000 times, right? 26,000 times, whatever, over long periods of time. So, okay, if you go, and I don't know how many entries we have in this table that's loaded, but you see, fewer and fewer deposits all the way down at the bottom of the list. Maybe there's, this is still, okay, so whatever, table doesn't go all the way down. If you have something with 3 transfers, we can have a conversation about how accurate that might be. Who knows, right? Similarly, okay, so here's counts for stuff. So what we're looking at here, and this is, I believe, both Tron and the Ethereum ecosystem, whatever, Ethereum style blockchains. So these are all deposit addresses. So we've got millions and millions on those chains of deposit addresses that don't have any interesting behavior beyond that. So that just means wallets we may know nothing about, whatever, sent stuff in. And then you start to see these are wallets associated with some kind of scam, something blacklisted, something else blacklisted, scam. This is just wallets that have transacted a lot of certain tokens. Sorry, this is a Wintermute, whatever, on wallet. There's some organizations that have. So what we see here is, thousands of transactions for a single one. So, you can look at Oros, Wintermute, there'll be some kind of pig butchering organization. So, what happens here is what we're seeing is not only are all the transactions out going to Binance associated stuff, but all the transactions in are coming from either one wallet or wallets that are all part of the same group. Again, you can do that programmatically with pretty high confidence if the other tags are high confidence. There are probably somewhere in here wallets that go from one service to another. Here's Nobitex Binance. Okay, so this appears to be an address that receives money from Nobitex affiliated stuff, which is somewhat public. I mean, there's tagging whatever out there. Here's a Tornado Cash one. So this is a deposit address where the incoming guy has received money from Tornado Cash, and then the outgoing stuff goes to Binance, right? There's another sent and received, whatever. Other sort of interesting examples. These are often just random, whatever, services in the middle. So you can do that kind of stuff programmatically. Another Nobitex. Okay. Well, okay, whatever it is. And you can see here also many of these are much smaller amounts. I think most crypto people would say you're not supposed to use the same address 30,000 times or 13,000 times. But this is proof that people do that. This particular way of looking at the data doesn't account for the sizes of the transactions. I don't think I put that in this either, not just amounts. So it's possible that some of those are tiny and large. We're not sorting by that here. That's not our purpose. The purpose is just sort of to illustrate one of the rare cases where you can, with very high confidence, programmatically identify millions and millions of wallets using what maybe qualifies as AI or a very simple form of feature clustering, but really nothing particularly deep. This does not help you once you're a couple of steps away from the exchange if you're moving in a direction where there aren't any tags or publicly available identifying information, right? So the exchange side, we know. If 2 stops on the left is Tornado Cash, Uniswap, Coinbase, whatever, then yeah, you've got a nice little path there. You're fine. If a few steps away, there's just nothing there. I mean, whoever's on the other side of this, we don't have any information about, whoever this guy is, right? Yeah, there may not be much there, and you can't necessarily do a good job in that direction without more information. And what we're doing here, these forwardings, this is not guessing. It's a rare case where you can really do stuff like this that's not guessing without more information. So it is hard. We often see between a known scam address and an exchange deposit address, we know with certainty it's a scam because the victim came out or somebody was arrested or whatever. And then we know the endpoint exchange deposit address because it's only forwards into the exchange. If there's 3-4 hops between them, who controls which of those? When does the scammer give up control, right? You can't tell, and there's probably pretty good plausible deniability if nobody's got keys on a thumb drive and gets arrested, right? Inferring that is a risky game for legal work.
I think to try and put this in an analogy that most people would understand is that there are many ways to move through a city. You may know where the train station is, where all the buildings are, but you can't be sure any degree of certainty that if you're meeting somebody somewhere, that which route they took, unless either like you have more information, like a CCTV caught them, or somebody saw them, or they picked up some donuts along the way.
No, that's a good example. I mean, you can identify metro station entrances even without the signs because you go in and it goes straight to the train.
Yeah.
But what's happening 3 steps back that way? Without more information, you see somebody on a security camera, you can track their route. If you don't, or you see them on a security camera, but the building has no sign in the front, you can't guess what's in there. You can guess the metro station is the metro station entrance. It gets pretty hard once you move away from large, well-known services and their on-ramps, entry points, metro station exchange, have the same behavior. Right? Withdrawals are very different. Right? You can find addresses money was sent to off an exchange, but you have no clue if that address is a different exchange deposit address. I mean, if it's tagged, it is. Self-custody or not, I don't know. We can identify, for example, BitGo custodial wallets because BitGo stuff gets deployed by a single collection of deployers. But if somebody's running a custody service we've never heard of that just started and they fire up a brand new custody deployer contract and you send money to that, what you're going to see is a contract that was deployed by another contract that was probably funded by money taken off of an exchange, and then money sitting in the new wallet. No information. Total black box. In principle, the exchange they withdrew from would know the name. Let's say that exchange is a fixed float, a shapeshift or whatever. Blank. Right? Nothing. Total black hole. And it's not like you can ever answer those questions with beyond a reasonable doubt, the American legal phrase, unless you've got more information. It just doesn't, you can't infer that. There is no way of guessing. So.
And that's one of the things that we wanted to point out when it comes to on-chain tracing and tracking and stuff like that, and clustering, if you want to call it that. Although, I'm not a big fan of the term. You just have to recognize that there are certain limitations, and
stuff runs the gamut from this is true with scientific precision, and you cannot answer this question with the information given. Everybody remembers some standardized tests, A, B, C, and D. D is often cannot tell from the information given.
Yeah.
That is the case here a reasonable fraction of the time.
Yep. And on that note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you've got any comments, questions, feel free to hit us up in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you for watching. We appreciate your time, and have a great weekend. We'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah.